Namaskar and Jai Hind. In this episode of Samvad, we'll be talking about the spy ship in Sri Lanka, and we have with us Vice Admiral Anup Singh, former Commanding in Chief, Eastern Naval Command. Welcome to Samvad, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Start off the first question, which is basically in everybody's mind. Yuan Wang-5, the media has called it the spy ship, is docking in Hambantota. The US and Indian governments have expressed concerns about this ship. Why should India and USA be concerned about this ship?
Well, Mayank, the term spy ship is used primarily because it can eavesdrop and it can pick up electronic messages. It can track missiles. It can track satellites. It can pick up signals of radars, radio. It can do what is called electronic warfare, which means in passive terms, it can pick up, record, and carry out continuous surveillance of any kind of electromagnetic or radio waves and radar waves. Now, the Chinese call it a scientific research vessel. By the way, just 2 years ago, there were two Chinese research vessels or survey vessels which kept going between, if I remember correctly, I think it was early 20 or early 21 maybe. Yes, early 21. They kept going on what is called the 90 East Ridge line, which is directly south of the Andaman Nicobar Islands. And it is a ridge under the sea. It's like a mountain. They kept going along that line. And the obvious reason was to carry out not just a hydrographic survey in waters which they are not supposed to be seen, nor are they supposed to be using it, but obviously for mapping the seabed and perhaps also for recording what kind of subsurface dynamics exist for their submarines to go through. Now, this ship is also known, Yuan Wang-5, by the way, Yuan Wang-1, a much smaller vessel, was commissioned in 1979. This vessel was commissioned in 2007. It is much larger than Yuan Wang-1. It has many more parabolic antennae as can be seen on its upper deck. It has a large amount of fuel, provisions, crew, and a large amount of equipment, which can be used for surveillance in all mediums. It is also being said in the press that it can carry out survey of the seabed, which means that it is as good as a hydrographic vessel, apart from being an electronic surveillance vessel. So India's concerns are twofold. Firstly, in the Rajiv Gandhi Jayawardene Accords in 1987, it was made very clear that Trincomalee or any other Sri Lankan port will not be used or loaned to or used by foreign militaries, not just the navy of a foreign country. Secondly, Sri Lanka being as close as it is, situated as close to India as it is, anything that happens over there, including civil strife, as was seen very recently, economic crisis, as was seen very recently. It, after all, is disturbing to India and affects India, not just morally, but it is morally bound to go and assist a neighbor. It affects India adversely also in many other ways. And you'll be aware that between Jan of this year and now, we have offloaded aid in food, drugs, petroleum products, etc., to the tune of $3.8 billion. Now, we are not a developed nation, but you need to come to aid of an immediate neighbor in crisis. And otherwise, it affects everything insofar as economy, political and diplomatic relations are concerned, and strategically. We don't want others to come and meddle in these waters and in this area. So it is an area of, it is a matter of great concern to us. Why is it of concern to America? One, absolutely plain and simple, America has been seeing since 2009 what has been happening in the South China Sea. It doesn't want to repeat of that kind of a scenario in the Indian Ocean. After all, America has its interests in the Indian Ocean only to ensure that there is peace and tranquility, and not because it has a base called Diego Garcia tucked away in one part of the Indian Ocean. So it also is keen to ensure that sea lines of communication are always kept free and open.
Sir, in the name of the Belt and Road Initiative and anti-piracy activities, the PLAN has been increasing its activity around the Indian Ocean. It has increased in numbers. Its battleships, I believe, have outnumbered the United States Navy. Now it's setting up ports in Hambantota, using ports in Hambantota, then Gwadar, Djibouti. So the Indian Ocean was known to the backyard of the Indian Navy, sir. Do you see a rising challenge to the Indian Navy in this region, sir? I mean, do you foresee something of a South China Sea situation developing around the Indian Ocean also, vis-a-vis the Indian Navy and the PLAN?
Mayank, you are right. This is an area of concern. It has been an area of concern for us for the last about 10 to 12 years, and particularly since the early 2000s, when all of a sudden much larger allocation of capital resources was made to the PLA Navy as compared to the PLA Army and the PLA Strategic Forces and the PLA. And there is no doubt, you're right, that they have gone up to about 355 ships, which includes smaller vessels, which includes Liaoning and the other two carriers. But numbers don't really make the only difference at sea. When it comes to sea control, when it comes to sea dominance, when it comes to making possible for a particular navy to have reach as well as staying power. That requires a lot of logistical capabilities at sea, which means a floating logistic train, as the Army calls it. However, even if the Chinese are doubling down on making ships in excess of about 15 to 20 a year these days, warships, whereas we have not been able to even do 1/20th of that per year because of resources and because of constraints of allocation of defense capital. It still is India's backyard. And it is still possible to mark and countermark Chinese vessels, including their submarines, because technologically we have acquired certain platforms, including in the air and including on the surface, which can even track Chinese submarines as they leave, even hidden through the Sunda or Lombok Straits. Strictly speaking, by United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas, UNCLOS 3 of 1982, submarines are supposed to transit only on surface while passing international straits like the Malacca. And the Malacca, nobody can go submerged except midget submarines, which they are not allowed to do, really speaking, because of the depth constraints. So even if the Chinese come submerged, which they have attempted on more than one occasion, our current day platforms in the air and on the surface are able to track them. And once you start tracking and deliberately advertising that, look, a Chinese submarine is entered, warships in any case don't escape our notice. They're surface warships. When they enter the Malacca Strait, immediately they are tracked in order to make them aware that we are capable of doing this. Now, the point that I'm trying to make is that the southernmost Chinese base in Hainan is still about 5,000 nautical miles away from Djibouti, about 4,000 nautical miles away from any port on the west coast of India, which is a long haul. So if they do not have fleet support ships like oil tankers, of the Navy and replenishment ships, they will not be able to sustain. So that is what, that capability is what makes the difference between a blue water navy and a green water navy, as the Chinese are. In the 70s and 80s, the Chinese were only a brown water navy. Towards the end of 80s, they started acquiring by reverse engineering Soviet era destroyers and frigates. And submarines, of course, they have achieved a lot, yet they are technologically not as advanced as they should be. And therefore, they are very careful even in sending their submarines into this ocean. Now, it is still worrisome because very soon they will have more places than just Gwadar, more bases than just Djibouti, and therefore there will be halting stations, there will be stations for replenishment, and most importantly for rest and recreation for the crew, because manpower really requires a lot of caregiving, even if the seas are calm. And you made a mention about their experience in the Gulf of Aden because of piracy. Actually, in many ways, we are responsible for having um, for their presence in the Gulf of Aden ever since 2008. Because on two occasions, the Chinese were really embarrassed. On the first occasion, the Somali pirates had almost boarded one of their merchant ships, and one of our naval ships, which was already on patrol in the Gulf of Aden, along with a few other navies. Chinese were still not present over there, was able to send out its helicopter and scare away those pirates, and they left the merchant ship to itself. So China profusely thanked us, which came out of the press in 2008, sometime in October or November. Another incident closely followed that incident when once again pirates tried to hijack one of their merchant ships. And then the Chinese decided that they will send not one like other nations, but 3 ships at a time. And till today, and they are called anti-piracy task groups or task force. Till today, they have not withdrawn those 3 ships. In the sense they do tenures of 3 to 4 months at a time. One of them is a tanker for replenishment of oil, etc., because they don't like to enter too many ports other than Djibouti and once in a while Salalah or Muscat. And they also want to achieve what is called sea legs in naval jargon. That means staying. So this has been a great experience, and I mean, in hindsight, only in lighter vein one can say that we are responsible for having got.
So I'll expand the issue to the Quads. The Chinese call it the Asian NATO. I mean, how I see it is more of a it is more of a naval of like-minded nations. Sir. But sir, I mean, the US have repeatedly said that the rest of the nations need to put in their weight behind the Quad. What, in your view, sir, should the Indian Navy do to become axis around which the whole of this Quad system works? I mean, the deficiencies and that what should the Navy be doing?
Mayank, you're absolutely right that the center of gravity of Quad must revolve around India. And that is not because we want to look big and feel the most important out of the 4 Quad members. But the proximity of China, its assertive attitude and aggressive behavior in the South China Sea, which is slowly coming, which has been witnessed in Galwan in 2020, and that was not the first time we saw it on the land border. Therefore, it is a well-known fact that the Chinese Achilles heel lies in the Malacca Straits. As then President Hu Jintao said in 2004, called it the Malacca dilemma. And the Chinese have ever since then been denying any such statement having been made, but it was recorded. And even now, if you Google, Reuters of the time, or even now, put down this phrase of the Malacca dilemma, you will see what was its origin. It is a fact that they face and fear the Malacca dilemma, not as much from India as they used to fear from America, because America has the Seventh Fleet in the Pacific, the Fifth Fleet um, in the West, uh, in the Mediterranean, in the Persian Gulf, and it has at any time a large number of vessels in these areas. Plus, Diego Garcia is a well-known base. Um, Even the Americans have not been able to afford to keep up with the times, and they are getting very worried ever since 2009 when China uh, claimed the 9-dash line and said actually it has existed for the last 2000 years. And in the name of the 9-dash line, they've been calling it their territorial seas. That's a huge 3.6 million square kilometers of water body that they claim as their own waters. They don't even call it an exclusive economic zone, which it is not, sir. They call it their own territorial waters. Um, the Americans, therefore, have been getting more and more worried, and they know the reason why. In numbers, the Chinese are quickly expanding their fleet. They have also suddenly realized that they need not only a logistical floating train at sea, which means tankers, fleet support ships, expeditionary vessels of the kind that were used by the Americans during Desert Shield in 1990 and Desert Storm in 91. Once they get this capability and they have attained sea legs or experience in the Indian Ocean in particular, then they will become a true blue water navy like the Americans. So the Americans want to curb this tendency because everyone knows that the Chinese um, do not think and act straight. It's been everybody's experience. A small example, when President Xi Jinping visited um, the United States for the first time after assuming presidency, it was, I think, 2015, if I'm not mistaken. And the US President Barack Obama hosted the president and the first lady in the White House, in what is called the Rose Garden of the White House. And in his welcome speech, he said that we are very concerned, the world is concerned about artificial islands in the South China Sea. We hope that these will not be militarized. And in his return speech, President Xi Jinping said, you have a promise that they are not meant to be used for military purposes. Just 8 to 10 months down the line, the first of those artificial islands in Mischief Reef was equipped with SAM-9s, long-range SAMs. And thereafter came fighter aircraft, which are there till now on 3 of these artificial islands. So you cannot take anything that the Chinese say at any level at face value. And therefore, the Americans are very worried. And that's one of the reasons for the strategy of AUKUS, where the Americans sprang a surprise on the French, and who were already doing a deal, had signed a deal almost 5 years ago with the Australians about conventional submarines. The Americans have now offered their technology, which they have never done to anybody other than the British, no other NATO member, for sharing nuclear-powered submarine designs and construction capability. So there is no doubt that the Americans also know, and that's why from Hillary Clinton's time as Secretary of State, they have been calling India the linchpin in their pivot to the east, um, uh, renamed as rebalancing, which has never taken place. But because they cannot afford to spare such resources in the Indian Ocean. But what is it that we require to do in order to become the axis? Not once again, as I said in the beginning, that because we want to look big, we want to look important, but because these are our waters. And remember, India means, peninsular India means We have the second largest peninsula in the world, which is exposed and open on three sides. Other than Sri Lanka and Maldives, there is no other country which obstructs our EEZ to any level. And therefore, we have a large expanse with 212 ports dotting the entire peninsula. We have to not only look after territorial integrity, but we also have to look after security of the sea lanes, which are used by the most critical economies, the most important economies in the world, including the Chinese. And why did Hu Jintao call it the Malacca dilemma? Because 80% of their oil and gas imports pass through the Indian Ocean, very close to the Indian Peninsula. Almost 60 to 70% of their exports pass through the Indian Ocean, through the Malacca Straits. So it is best to once again checkmate their Achilles heel, and I mean make use of the Achilles heel, at least psychologically. How can we do that? We can do it only if the Navy becomes stronger in not only numbers but also technology. That requires a lot more allocation than is being currently done year after year insofar as naval budgets are, so that we make up the shortages in our fleet.
So talking of Achilles heel, sir, and how to basically keep China in its own backyard, sir. And since we're running short, sir, I'll request for a very short and brief answer, sir. Sir, looking at the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, sir, they're sort of known as the floating, sir, aircraft carriers, the solid aircraft carriers we have. Has the Indian Navy made the best strategic use out of these islands, sir, to checkmate the Chinese in our backyards?
A very good question, Mayank. The Andaman Nicobar Islands have always been called the unsinkable aircraft carrier, which it actually is. Out of the 572 islands, I think there are only about 11 which are being used at the moment, which are open to use. Some have been reserved as tribal reserves, and rightly so. No man is allowed to go there except certain security forces to make sure that nobody interferes with their natural habitat. Most of them have been kept reserved as reserve forests. And therefore, even tourists are not allowed to go there. I feel the time is right. In fact, long time ago, we should have converted the Andaman Nicobar Islands into dual use facility. Because just across the Andaman Sea, you can look at Thailand, you can look at Malaysia, you can look at Indonesia. The terrain is exactly the same. The environment is similar. The forest and green cover is almost the same. The climate is the same. So while the Japanese, the Australians, the Americans, the Europeans fly down to those countries and generate so much revenue through tourism, why can't we utilize these islands? But more importantly, since you said it is an unsinkable aircraft carrier, which is true, finally, after the Kargil Review Committee recommended and the group of ministers accepted in the year 2001, 2002, an Andaman Nicobar Command was established in October 2001. And it's been now over 2 decades since we have had a full-fledged command with a commander-in-chief heading the command in rotation from the 3 services. But we haven't got assets. Once again, because, armed forces in a democracy like, in a developing democracy like India, and in an economy which is stretched to the brim because of other priorities of looking after reducing the number of those who are below the poverty line, raising the standard of living, giving employment opportunities to our poor and low income group people. Allocation to defense has always been termed as non-developmental expenditure. And that's why it gets not so much priority. We need to quickly start thinking and putting and adding special capital allocation for a few years so that naval platforms in particular, which could include destroyers or just frigates and corvettes, and certain submarines which could be allocated from mainland after infrastructure is built to look after them in the Andaman Nicobar Islands. So that Malacca Strait, which is just 80 miles from the southernmost island, from Indira Point, can be looked after by us day in and day out, rather than just sending certain platforms to the airfield at Port Blair or the naval port in Port Blair on staggered basis from Visakhapatnam or Bombay.
Sir, I hope this special allocation you're talking about is provided to the Indian Navy so that to ensure that the Indian Ocean actually remains Indian, sir. Thank you so much, sir. And it's been an honor speaking to you, sir. And we hope to have you on another issue of Samvad very soon, sir. Thank you so much and Jai Hind.
Thank you, Mayank. Jai Hind.